What's your big ask today? Well, I guess for many of us, it's when will life return to some sort of normality? Of course, we don't know yet. We've got to wait. This Sunday is Rogation Sunday, followed by 3 days called Rogation Days, which lead up to Ascension Day. Rogation comes from the Latin word meaning ask, and the days began when a bishop from southern Gaul, which is now southern France, called Bishop Emeritus, started this process as a result of a terrible earthquake that afflicted them back in the 5th century AD. They were reminded that they're not in control of life and that they need to trust in a power bigger than themselves and that they shouldn't take life for granted. And that's why year by year Christian people ask for God's blessing on the basics of life and especially on our food production. So Rogationtide is the big ask time of the year, when we say to God, we need you to bless our crops and indeed our commerce, all that makes it possible for us to live, because we're not in control. And this is especially so at this time of year when we're suffering from COVID-19. We're in a sort of earthquake in the midst of it, where we're being shaken to the core. We feel vulnerable in terms of this invisible enemy. We can't take life for granted in the way that we perhaps did. Normally in Rogationtide, our parish churches, particularly in rural areas, beat the bounds. That is, they walk around the edges of their parishes and pray God's blessing on the farmers, the crops, and all that is there. Of course, they can't do that in the pandemic, and so we'll have to do it in a sort of virtual way. But nevertheless, this pandemic has made us far more aware of how much we depend on our farmers and the food they produce. I don't know if you're aware, but farmers bring about £8 billion worth of dividend to our society. And as part of the food and drinks industry, they contribute with others about 112 billion to the economy. So both individually as a community and as part of a bigger operation, they really do matter. And at a time when food security has risen to the top of our agenda, we need to be thanking God for these farmers. So during this pandemic, our big ask has to be, God, will you please bless our farmers and what they're doing? And perhaps God's big ask back to us is, will you cooperate with them? Will you appreciate them more? And will you respect the food that they make much more than you have done in the past? This week's Gospel reading from John chapter 14 verses 15 to 20 reassures us that Christ will never leave us orphaned. The earthquake of his death and the shaking of his ascension don't mean that he's walked out on us. Instead, as Pentecost says, the Spirit is given so that we know he is with us to the end of the age and that he's inviting us to cooperate in bringing blessing to this world. So as we ask for God's blessing, God asks for our cooperation. In this largely rural area, our farmers are those whom we seek that blessing for in particular, because they represent cooperation with God in the production of food, the stuff of life. And they do it through thick and thin, summer, autumn, winter, spring. Thank God for that commitment. So may God bless them, so that through them we too may know blessing, as we're given the food we eat and we need to eat for daily life. Amen.